Very pleased to be here. Thanks again to Patricia Corson and Expo. And obviously, just talking for a second about Locust projects, which most of you already know, but this is Locust Roundtable, which is an open format discussion that we've sort of organized based on the principles of experimentation and of people talking about things that they actually want to talk about and the way they want to talk about them. So this is how we've been organizing these conversations in Miami at Locust Projects for the past couple of years, and I'm just so happy that Ross Jordan was able to give us a chunk of his interest and time and explaining, and again, very much thanks to Patricia Corson and Expo.
And our director happens to be here.
Oh, is that him? Okay, great.
Mr. Tony Carmen.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for making this possible.
We're all together.
This is great. Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So, in any case, I'm just very, very happy that we could get started, or actually rather finish up with Ross Jordan, and I'll just do a very, very brief introduction and then really let Ross talk about this very interesting and timely topic, and then we'll kind of break out and do some discussion about just in the same way that we just were working on the last one. So Ross he's actually the Assistant Director of Exhibitions and the Curatorial Fellow in the Department of Exhibitions and Exhibition Studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He has a master's degree in art history and arts administration and policy from the same institution. Previously, he was a 12-month intern at the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art, where he was a contributor to the museum's blog Inside Out and provided research support for future exhibitions. He's interested, and I was going to say, Ross, you're interested in the intersection of material and visual culture and political and public imagination. And I won't say too much more about you because I think some people may know you or may not know you, but there's room for that. And I just want to let you launch on with the topic, which is a really interesting, provocative title called Beer Summit, Envisioning Artistic Engagement with Archive. And here we go.
Thanks for inviting me, man. It's fun to be here. So this is called Beer Summit, and that title came out of an incident that, is anybody familiar with the Beer Summit thing? Okay.
Maybe we could just explain it, because I was actually like, what's that?
Yeah, what is this? So, Beer
say.
Summit, when President Barack Obama was elected, shortly after that, there was an incident in Cambridge where Lewis Gates, who's a historian, literature writer, economist, type thinker person, was arrested at Harvard trying to get into his own house by the sergeant of the Cambridge police. So this is a really fascinating photo of this really important scholar that's known, like not only in the United States but globally, and actually is a friend of the president's, in front of his own house in handcuffs, walking away. Of course, he's a black guy, so it's this really weird image of this prominent African American being walked from his own house because someone across the street saw him trying to get into his own house because he had lost his keys. He'd come back from a trip from China, and him and his driver were trying to break. You know how you break into your own house to get inside it, and he got arrested. And so that exploded into a big media conversation. And Barack Obama did a press conference where he got asked about this incident and called the sergeant stupid. And there was some blowback from that. And then, in a way of kind of a way of starting a dialogue around this moment where the racial situation in America was raised to a really high level, to kind of control that dialogue or to have an example of what the dialogue could be. He invited both the arresting sergeant and his deputy, and him and Lewis Gates. They invited him to the Rose Garden to have a beer, to talk about the issue and kind of demonstrate how we can talk about race in these incidences in America. So that was the president convening what ended up being called a beer summit. And so the beer summit is just a way of me kind of reusing this invented term to talk about issues around politics and visual culture. That's why it's called the beer summit. But there's beer, which is great. So I'm drinking a beer. You guys should get beer too. I drank a lot last night, so I'm really well hydrated. But thanks for inviting. This is really cool, really interesting topic for me. And what I'm going to kind of do is I'm going to just give a quick uber fast history of presidential libraries, how they function and work. Chicago is probably going to have a presidential library. And I think that and there's talks about how it's going to come here and what it's going to be like in certain circles, but I feel like the arts community has a really strong say in this, largely because these presidential libraries, as you'll see, they kind of become, they're both archives, also political statements, and they're visual things that stay on our imagination and transform the way we think. And that's what artists do all the time. They're the experts on that kind of stuff. So having this conversation around artists seems really interesting. This is my super fast history of presidential libraries. This is the country. There they all are. There's only 14. Obama's will be the 14th library. The first one, and these are lists of all the presidents, these guys, these white dudes in the libraries. The first one was actually Franklin Delano Roosevelt's.
Do you want the last one? Is that the next one?
That might, yeah, you can't even read that, can you? Do it. And this will be fast. Okay. So the first one was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he actually, the story behind his library is really interesting because you would think that every president has these, but it's really a modern phenomenon since World War II. So as World War II was starting, this is the same time that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was finishing up one of his last terms in office. It was 1941 when this building was dedicated. He basically had his own private estate. He decided that he wanted to, as a gift to the country, and he'd been in the office for like 15 years. He served like 4 terms, right? So he's been in office for a long time. Spent 20 years as president, which is just insane. And so he's giving this gift of his archive and his life history to the American people. That's kind of how we describe this, as like a site that would be of incredible interest and draw lots of people to Hyde Park, New York. And so this is the building that he basically designed himself, essentially, in collaboration with some architects. These are some of the objects in that building. And this really started out as like a series of kind of small trinkets and weird things that were very idiosyncratic to himself and who he was, that ended up in the library. Strangely, when it was opened, it didn't mention things like the New Deal. It didn't mention the Depression in any kind of real way that he lived through. It wasn't like a moment where you could walk through the halls of his presidency and see that, how we kind of imagine the modern day presidential library. This was more like a cabinet of curiosities, where there's these little things that are like really important to him. One of the weird things is like a sphinx head that looks like Roosevelt, that one of his admirers sent him, made out of paper mache. That kind of weird stuff. So it's really creepy, weird stuff. But also, this building was dedicated in 1941. In 1943, Roosevelt signed the letter to start internment camps on Japanese Americans in the United States, right? So this is World War II broke out, Pearl Harbor happened. We're going to round up 100,000 Japanese Americans and move them into places, take them out of their homes, and move them basically into confinement across the country. So that isn't in here either. And that story, you think that story would be important enough to kind of elevate to a national dialogue to talk about how that happened, why it happened, and that the president is the primal authority that can do that in our country. But that's not in here. It's mostly a celebratory kind of thing, and to this day, there is some exhibits in the library that do talk about Japanese internment, do talk about the New Deal and the Depression, but it's still a celebratory thing. So it's just kind of like, this is I guess that kind of the scissor between the actual events that have happened that might not shine a bright light on the presidency, and the need or the want to kind of, I guess, celebrate this particular person, and that the presidential libraries are a place where it's mostly celebratory, and we don't get to confront kind of the real choices that had to be made by our executive office, which I think is kind of tragic. So that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is Clinton's library here. This is one of the most recent ones that was just built. I don't have a picture of Bush's. I think I do have a picture of Bush's library. But this is just to see the difference between these things, right? Here's Franklin. Here is like this enormous building built by architects.
The entire building is dedicated to the library?
Yeah, so there's several parts to the library. So one is that each library has an office for the president. So when they come into town, this is where they sleep, live, and eat and stay. They can just kind of do their thing there. There also just enormous amount of volume of material as well that goes into these things. Mostly now digital. I think this library has several. I can't remember. I have it written down, but it's probably in my notes. Many terabytes of data in it So it has the largest kind of volume of digital files in one single place. And then there's also just paper as well, just lots of paper that's in this space. But the design of the building, the amount of money that goes into it, the landscaping that goes around it, all this stuff is kind of just really I think a reflection of what the presidency means and what it does, right? So Franklin D. Roosevelt was very idiosyncratic. It was about him as a person and his kind of own vision. But this is a bigger vision. This is about a political party making a statement about the successes they've done in the presidency to kind of continue those same successes. And it's an image of power, of influence. It's like almost like a pyramid or a monument, but also guides in this kind of educational moment for people who walk through. And so this is, who's this? I don't know who this guy is. This might be true. This is Bush's library here. And you can almost kind of think like, well, how do these represent these two individuals and what they did? This is kind of more stoic. The outside doesn't look very celebratory. It's more like a very clean, very modern, very modern, I think it was. Whereas Clinton seems more hyper contemporary, I guess, with all the glass and whatnot. And here's Reagan. So Reagan is kind of the quintessential figure in the kind of presidential library narrative because he's so evoked by our current contemporary culture. And so you could say that, well, who goes? Have any of you been to presidential libraries? Yeah, nobody's been to them. So who goes to these things?
I've been to Clinton.
Oh, and so it's cool. You've been to Clinton? You've been to Clinton's library?
Yes, I have. In Arkansas.
Oh, yeah. Great. And Stepter's been to... Yeah, all right, cool.
Where's
Yeah,
that?
the Ford. Okay. And were those fun, interesting experiences, or?
I thought it was fabulous. I was super fascinated by it.
Yeah.
But I love libraries in general, and I love Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that helped. But I like it.
I'm actually from Arkansas. It's like, I've never been myself. It's amazing how many people just like flock to the area to go to the library.
Okay, so it's popular.
Oh yeah.
It's a big deal in Arkansas. Like they renamed the airport in Little Rock to the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport, and the whole deal. So it's really a big pride.
They control.
And I'm actually from Hot Springs, is where Bill Clinton grew up.
Yeah.
So there's big plaques. It's a big deal.
That's a great
Yeah, I'm
okay.
from Fayetteville, and they're like Hillary and Bill actually have like their house is like now a museum across from my old high school, and like I went to the University of Arkansas for a minute, and it's just like they control.
So spheres of influence, creation of narratives, selection of history.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's good to see. And then you went to Gerald Ford's, is it? Yeah, okay. It's very selective. This is a plane in the library. Like, what the heck? But did you find Clinton's library like inquisitive on his like presidency in really critical ways, or you thought it was just like
there was no critical analysis.
Yeah, right.
By any means. It's definitely a happy, glossy, this is what he was and what he did type situation. I just happened to like him already, so it wasn't. But Bush's library, I think I would have a different reaction to.
Yeah.
Even though there's a heavy contingent of 9/11 in Bush's library, I have been and I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a 9/11 memorial in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I think they each have their different context.
Yeah, I think the reason I bring up Reagan's library is the kind of I guess that the celebratory versus the critical analysis and engagement kind of thing. And Reagan's like one of those people where, in order to kind of maintain his continued kind of influence and power in this imagination of the Republican Party or in ourselves, like I think like I line myself up with Clinton, and so looking at Reagan's library kind of gives me a different picture, right? Like if I go to Clinton's library, I'm not going to be so hurt if it's not very critical.
Right.
But if I go in Reagan's library, I want it to be critical because I don't align myself with those political.
So which is really biased on our part.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure the pandemic is not mentioned in Reagan's library.
No, not at all. Yeah, not at all.
So
Yeah, you go ahead.
oh no, let's just,
And I guess so. And then within Reagan's library too is like the Iran-Contra scandal. The actual documents that talk about that event are actually in the archive, but they're not displayed anywhere. You can't learn about it going to that place. So there's like this weird scissor between those two things. So this is libraries. That's how they work. What's I guess key to know about them is that they're raised by public funds, but then supported into perpetuity by taxpayer dollars. So we all fund these things and their political narratives, whether or not we agree with them or not, right? They continue to kind of be reused and recycled forever and ever by our money, which is totally strange as well. So I think about like, well, where are tax dollars going? Well, they're going to support all sorts of stuff, including these libraries, and they're continuing as political tools. Cool. So any more questions about libraries, present libraries? That's my quick history. Okay.
It just sounds like these like hegemonic nationalists, like master choice circles or something.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, that's totally true.
This, but did you touch on the battle between Hawaii, New York, and Chicago on Obama's?
I can. Yeah, I can do that.
I think it's interesting. Yeah, if you could.
It's fascinating. Maybe you know more than I do. So if you all know the bids for the libraries, there's three in Chicago, I think. Champaign-Urbana, University of Illinois, at Chicago, the UIC, and then University of Chicago.
University of Chicago, Chicago State,
UIC, yeah. And UIC is doing this thing where they're actually collaborating with multiple other institutions to kind of get their bid done for Hyde Park. And then Hawaii is doing a bid, and then New York is also doing a bid. But I don't know much about those. Do you know any more?
I do. Something very fascinating about the Chicago one. Yes, the university's bidding for it. You also have the mayor who has made a personal appeal to it, which I'm sure carries much weight. But also Inglewood, of all neighborhoods, is very fascinating. Inglewood is put together as a community with their aldermen who are class at the Obama Presidential Library who put in that community. And I think that is a very interesting correlation between, I think that they could actually have a bid there.
Yeah.
I think that really hit home with Obama and with a lot of people familiar with our community.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Yeah, that's really true. So the question of like site, I think, is really important. Like who gets served by these giant circle jerks, as you call them, right? Who gets all the love? And so that kind of gets my mind. It goes like places like the Whole House, where there's I assume you guys are familiar with the Whole House, but started by Jane Addams. It's kind of like a really critical cultural change agent in the history of Chicago and the country. It celebrates a person, but it also is very embedded in service of a particular community. And it also is a place that seems to be self-critical in different ways. So that's like just one example of, well, if the Clinton Library looks like a kind of a celebratory place that can't be critical, what is a model of a site, of an archive, that actually can be really critically engaged with folks and people? Well, maybe the Whole House is a model for that kind of thing. That's where my mind kind of goes with that kind of stuff. But this is only to kind of jump us to this question of like, well, artists also deal with archives and whatnot, and how have they done that, how have they been doing that? And so some people come to my mind immediately when you think about like, well, artists working in archive material. There's James Luna, who does, I don't know if you guys are familiar with James, he's a Native American, and he does these really great kind of juxtapositions of himself and kind of Native American archive history that's kind of in our imaginations, but he's always trying to contest it, challenge it, reevaluate, and actually insert himself as a living kind of archive. These archives aren't just static things that get kind of manipulated and changed. And so James Luna is someone who's really radical about moving into archives, moving into museum spaces, and trying to transform them.
It seems like he's quoting the way like the world's parents with like instructors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when you think about the Presidential Library, is there a way where this kind of radical stuff could actually go down and happen in it? Probably not as we like imagine them now, but like if I was thinking about a library I would want to have that was about the political culture of the last 10 or 8 years, then I'd want this kind of intervention to be something that's actually possible in it. So James is one of those guys. I think about, this is the Coco Fusco piece, Couple in the Cage, that was also kind of cited at a museum, was here in Chicago.
And just to back up for a second, like what these two pieces are, I mean, these are contemporary artists that are dealing with notions of authority, notions of the presentation of truth inside of institutions. And so we're just continuing to think about creation of narratives and how presentation is, important, and how often there is not a degree of self-reflexivity in sort of authoritative presentations.
Yeah.
Can we backtrack a bit real quickly? So these are libraries, except the images they seem more like museums. Do they function like a library? Can people come in and just not?
The presidential library?
Presidential library. So they function as a library in the sense that I can come in and I can check out a book, I can go to a resource librarian and get access to a certain collection or archive that I normally wouldn't be able to. Or are they more like museums with collections, sort of like a natural history museum, but a living natural history museum?
That's a good question. I guess you wouldn't go to like the library to check out a particular thing. You would be requesting the material through the Freedom of Information Act. So you can't like there isn't a room you'll go to where there's like all this information that's kind of available and you can kind of select it out. I think they're highly curated experiences, and that you're kind of given whatever is in front of you, whatever you arrive with, that's what you're looking at.
So they're more like museums.
They're more like museums.
And they don't really function. You can't check out a book.
You can't check out a book.
But there is data. There is data to be able to access if you needed to, maybe, but we don't know. We could
the fact check, and the trick with the access to the data is that the president can just decide that he doesn't want certain information known as many as 12 years after he's left office. So you have this thing where there's like this gap of 12 years that's like almost statutory on most of the material. So we can imagine that like any kind of critical thing that goes down, we won't just know about it. We won't know about it until 12 years after. We can't find out the truth of what the communications were. So the question of like access and how you get access stuff is really key. And the fact that the president himself can just say, this I want people to see, and this I don't want people to see, and this I want people to see, and this one I don't want people to see. Even with the Freedom of Information Act, there's still a 12-year kind of waiting period.
Okay,
so is your proposal in a sense say like, okay, well, we could read you how we like think about our nation history in presidential museums, like substituting like these performance pieces as tools to like relearn like a post-colonial narrative of history versus maybe what these libraries do instead.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I want. Like, and that's what this dialogue really is about. Like, how can we learn from these other kind of interactions that, like, I'm going to say that challenge authority, have multiple narratives, don't give one perspective, but give kind of ambiguous and challenging kind of perspectives as well.
Or just like acknowledgement of authoritative presentation.
That this is one view, this is our view.
Right.
It's coming out of the political class.
Right. And in this case, like with Poco Fusco, half the museum goers that came to this Museum of Natural History like believed that these were two specimens of the Amerindian culture that had been plucked, whereas in fact these were two, like, they were actors.
Yeah.
So
they
were doing things like weaving with dollar bills and a degree of just really like this, they were taking all these expectations and pushing them to like the farthest degree of exoticism.
Yeah.
So.
But using the kind of authoritative visuals of a museum to make it really believable.
Yeah.
And that's a trick. So they can really go do really extreme, silly things like watch TV in the cage thing, and like they'd have people you could pay to have them do something or whatever, like really exploitative things. But because it was presented in this museum environment with the visuals of a museum, with guards nearby.
Yeah, and it was amazing that this museum allowed them to do it.
Yeah.
Too. And was that open-minded and let them do a really important site-specific project.
Which museum was this? I know they were at the Field Museum
At the Field,
for a period of time, which is interesting.
The which one, sorry?
The Field Museum?
The Field Museum here.
Yeah.
In Chicago.
Oh.
They went all over. So they were in Chicago. They went to Spain. I think they went to several spaces around the country, around the country, and then internationally as well. I can't remember.
Museum.
Yeah. The Field Museum was actually the first site that was hosted.
It's now devolved into basically a children's museum,
The
but
Field Museum?
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, somebody's open-minded and cool in there.
Yeah.
That's cool.
At least when this was like 70s, yeah. So yeah, more couple in the cage. These are just good examples of. They're so cool, yeah, so hip. How would I guess the charge for artists is that we're challenging authoritative narratives usually, and bringing out other perspectives and challenging people's imaginations. And these libraries, potential libraries, can be the place where that happens. And just to, I guess, jump inside these, kind of a more contemporarized. Let's actually. These are weird photos. So, Daniel Tucker, who's working on a project with the Reagan Library right now. I don't have much information on it, but he sent me these photos of his current project. I just want to show them to you guys because just really, so you get a sense of how weird these spaces are. So Reagan Library is all about kind of helping you kind of be with Reagan, even though he's dead, or walk in his shoes, right? And so this is being able to take a photo with Reagan walking down. This is I think this is a long corridor where they do important press conferences and stuff like that. So this is where when Obama announced that we had killed Osama bin Laden and shot him up, this is the corridor that he walked down with this red carpet and stuff. So you can walk by that corridor next to this exit door, which is weird. Or this other weirdly strange thing where you could be on the ranch with Reagan and
So it's about selfies.
exactly.
It's just so odd. The way the horse is amputated like that.
Yeah,
it's
creepy.
It's just the weirdest thing.
So maybe more communication with artists. These things could even be designed better, which would be great. So I guess this is kind of, following the way that Coco Fusco kind of reactivated the archive or narrative of kind of American Indians, the way that Luna, worked with that as well, by kind of putting their bodies into these archive situations. These are two examples that do a similar thing. So this is really an artistic move to make you embody a certain experience, to be closer to this figure. It's not so much about political narrative, but kind of an emotional response, which is a very artistic thing as well. What I think is just really fascinating that this is kind of the mode that these things work in, especially when you think about the history of just like the idiosyncratic weirdness of FDR's library to like I'm going to be in this kind of living installation with Reagan on a horse, trotting along on the side. That's a really big jump. And it really comes out of, I think, the political class, the people who design these things, really understanding that these are effective tools to change people's minds and get people thinking about different things. And use authority in interesting new kind of ways. And this is one of them, just living it and helping people live through that experience and really, really feel it. So that's just extremely strange. And then let me go to one last, and then please interrupt me if I'm like really going off topic or getting weird if you have other questions, want something to say. But the one last kind of example that Amanda actually brought to my attention.
Ross and I started this conversation, he was really interested in the libraries, and I was like, well, these libraries are so interesting, and the fact that they bring up this weird playfulness with archive is significant in terms of a lot of different practices that are happening in regards to the archive, and one of them is Walid Raad, and this one of the projects that he's best known for is the creation of this thing called the Atlas Project, which most of you are probably familiar with, and the Atlas Project is actually a completely fictitious archive that's presented as true. And it took me like a year to realize that it was not real, and I was like in grad school. Anyway, but so and also right, Fred Wilson and the other James Luna and these other people that have come up, they're dealing with this problem in a really interesting way. And so it's a good way to open up this conversation beyond who's paying for this and why should we be mad. Yeah.
And so this, I guess the the key thing about Walid is that, yeah, it is a fictitious archive, but it also deals with a serious subject of war. And so it's a way, it's a good fusion of like dealing with really hard things and really hard, difficult issues through the archive presentation, archival presentation. So these are basically, I guess supposedly bullet holes that Walid documented when he was a child, when he was 15, running around. He would pick up the shells or something and measure those with the size of the holes, and then he would document, where the bullets were coming from by the manufacturer, and so he could know
what country they came from.
Yeah.
So like this, you're seeing like a information graphic of like how many different countries participated in blasting apart this wall in I think it's Lebanon.
Lebanon, yeah.
So it's completely outrageous. It's kind of outrageous, but we're sort of willing to go there, and then we're also willing to consider why he may have gone to the trouble to create a fictitious truth.
Yeah. I guess with this too, it opens up the malleability of the archive, like this sense of like what's true and what isn't true. But that all this stuff is really malleable. It's this material that can kind of be manipulated and changed to tell lots of different kinds of stories. So nothing's kind of concrete anymore, which is
right. And also like the ability and like the tool of misinformation, or like the tool of lying or presenting like artists who lie intentionally in their practice. Like that's totally
Sherry Levine.
Right, yeah, like Sherry Levine, and there's an artist in Miami named Domingo Castillo who like is constantly making up his bio, press releases. It doesn't it's completely unimportant to him if the information is true, and that's very interesting.
And that's I guess the love level why that's interesting to me as well is because that's kind of what politicians do is they spin things.
Right. Right. They're spinning just as
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They're just spinning just as much, right? So it's not a new thing, but it's funny that these politicians are doing it on one level and artists do it on another level, and so towards different means maybe,
Yeah.
right?
Far
different means. But what that kind of gets me to thinking, and maybe I don't know if you guys think about this, is that I start thinking about politicians as artists, as like these performance artists that are doing stuff, which is also really creepy because when people assume the presidency, right, they actually are doing a performance art project. Like they literally are coached how to talk to cameras, how to do interviews. They have to wear certain clothing. There's uniforms for everything. Like when Obama's on Air Force One or flying in his like helicopter, he has to wear his bomber jacket, right? He's not in his suit jacket. So there's a performative level to that kind of being. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's an interesting point, and I've also found it.
Yeah, I know you're here.
But what your talk has raised for me is like, especially the reference to Ronald Reagan and others group, is that there's a moment in which, like, you go to the Reagan Presidential Library or the Clinton Presidential Library because you're a fan, or Ronald Ford's Presidential Library. You grew up in the same hometown, and so it's required for elementary school. But there you kind of go in, like you mentioned, with these thoughts about like how do I feel about Reagan already, how do I feel about Clinton already. But there's these other zones. The National Archives is a really good example. Basically, any of the big sort of public institutions in DC have these sort of components of display. Like they have these exhibitions and things like that. And just like the Walid Raad sort of project that I was with, there's no. It's up to us to sort of know how much of it is propaganda, how much of it is like ideology, and how much of it is like there's a presentation on a piece of paper that exists. So I think there's an interesting sort of like maybe relation to make with these like specific and marked off zones of like historiography versus sort of like these current like, functioning branches of public service and government that like also are doing this work. Yeah, and so the relation to what you're on is really interesting. Or that like confusion about when does this slip into like the ideology,
That's such a good point about like how we're not getting any help to figure it out either.
Yeah.
Like it's just about like learning to trust or not trust these voices. I guess build a culture of criticality.
And it also speaks to how like the general public is just stonewalled in general as far as politics goes, or whether it be local, national, what have you. Even walking into an institution like that, whether it be the Smithsonian or the Presidential Library, or there are these things that as I'm not articulating this very well, but depending on your level of intelligence or exposure to culture or what have you, you're not really in a position to make that decision for yourself, because it is put in the context of, this is what we want you to think, and therefore we've subtly laid it out in that way.
I like this notion of having to be like a really informed kind of citizen, and to be able to challenge your own thoughts, what you're thinking, when you walk into these spaces. Which is when we're not. I don't think most people are acculturated to actually do that. I feel like when we do go to the museums or those kinds of spaces, we're more like the people who saw Coco Fusco's Guillermo Pena's piece. We are immediately kind of accepting in some fashion of what we're seeing, or want to buy into it, I guess. So maybe we're easily fooled sometimes.
But a lot of people come out of the Reagan meet.
Yeah, probably. Well, after you ride that horse with him, and get your photo taken and your selfie. Yeah.
Should we flip the lights on and
Yeah.
turn the focus back towards like the
Let's do it.
conversation?
Thank you. I'm just going to cut this out.
I don't know if you have more images to go through or.
No, but I can pull up stuff. Yeah. And I guess the one kind of question is, and we can get really specific about this and think about Obama's library and what you all feel it should be doing or could do, what the opportunities there. But I think it's kind of an interesting question that I think everybody in Chicago should be thinking about, because this thing will actually be here.
When is the expected date for it to actually?
So the request for proposals went out already, and so that's just a packet of information that goes out. Anybody can have it. It's on there's a website for it. The President of the Library. So that goes out. I think the final kind of proposals from the various cities or different entities are due at the end of the summer, I think. And then they'll know. Then there'll be some deliberations and back and forth. And then I think in the late January of next year, Obama will sit down and just pick a site. So that's the timeline. So
Is it completely up to him?
Yeah,
Alone?
totally. Yeah, it's a complete
And I
executive.
would suggest that he wouldn't have of course with him. He wouldn't pick, wouldn't that be amazing if it ended up in Englewood though? I mean, think of the economic possibilities for completely changing the neighborhood.
Well, I mean, that's very divisive because from what I understand about some of the politics that Matthew and I were talking about the other day is that the library, there's a divisive issue with the library being in Englewood. Maybe I have this wrong, but
it was going to be at U of C, but there's protests about not having a trauma unit at the hospital.
Right.
They really don't want the South Side involved with Hyde Park, so people were protesting it out front. Just based on the idea that they should be focusing on communities being part of the South Side and not just building up their own little nest or little jewel of the South, I guess, or so. And I think Englewood's also a really high crime and high violence area. So the idea
Well,
of
it is,
bringing
that's
in-
right. It would be such
Yeah.
a
yeah. But I guess the argument, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth at all. Obviously, I'm not from Chicago, but there's an issue of, right, if there's no money for trauma units in this neighborhood and people have to take ambulances over to the next neighborhoods that are funded and then they die in the ambulance, what does that say about, oh great, let's pop a presidential library here? There's something, deeply problematic about that points to big, issues, but that's not necessarily the topic at hand, I guess. The topic at hand, the bigger point with that is, what does it mean to have a commemorative narrative being constructed in a way that does or does not make, like, there's a strong reaction against that. So that's interesting that there's such a strong reaction, and it's interesting to the degree that this has to do with whether or not a narrative is being made or whether or not a narrative is true.
Yeah. And I guess the question of like site is just that, like, there is a narrative that this library needs to go someplace where it can be economically beneficial.
Right.
Right.
That's not right.
Like, why put it in the same, already prospering economic areas? Right. And I think, and I completely agree with you that it is a totally divisive
Aspect.
yeah. But I think that if they did put it there, it would force them to put a trolley in.
Yeah,
or
maybe.
Force them to put a Mariano's, or because it's a food desert also. So there's all these different issues that, if you did plop the presidential library down there, they would have to fix up the neighborhood.
Aren't they supposed to be putting up Whole Foods in Inglewood too?
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It's a model that Detroit uses, actually.
It's what?
It's a model that Detroit has used.
Huh.
So in some of their most bombed out, like midtown, downtown places, they put a Whole Foods and like, okay, well, let's see what happens. And all these condos started popping up. So it was a really weird, like, social experiment,
The same thing's happening back home in Arkansas too. Back in Radio, like they're putting up Whole Foods and it's just like.
Right, like instead of actually starting to get people to live there first, get like the resources there, and then that would follow.
Well, what bodies have to be pushed out for like that to happen?
The what, sorry?
I said, well, what bodies have to be pushed out for that to happen?
Well, what needs to be pushed out?
What bodies?
What bodies? Oh, I
kinds
don't
of
know.
So it's like condos and Whole Foods.
Right. Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like for the people who live there, but we're getting off topic. So to get back on topic, I wanted to get into something that you and I just talked about, which is the fact that a lot of these libraries have these sort of like weird phenomenological elements to them, where you can stand inside of a replica of the Oval Office, or you can stand inside of or you like have this weird relationship with Reagan in a hallway where you learn he's to scale, and then you want to shake his hand, and then you can ride on that horse, which is so weird. But so there are these elements by which you're encouraged to actually like participate in this physical way with this reality, and that's very weird. And there's something theatrical about that. There's something performative about that, and perhaps for me, I think of the artist Mike Nelson. Who, the English artist, but basically is kind of known for creating these tableaus where you can live and walk, and artwork might take over an entire building, and it's these corridors and these spaces that are, you're walking in them, they're real, but they're kind of these tableaus that are changing, they change your psychological state, and you believe that they're real and they are real. So there's just a weird slippage there that I kind of wonder if we could just toss around a little bit.
Yeah, I find like that's like one of the most effective, a really effective political tool that artists use, as well to kind of, exactly, to put ourselves in different experiences, or like this experience isn't suitable enough, and so, or it's almost like walking into a painting, right? So a painting you look at and you kind of experience from the outside, but then if you were in that painting, the psychological experience, all the emotional. Everything's heightened up big time. I feel like that's what that kind of action is all about. Just like wearing a costume or something, for Halloween, you kind of embody something. And the same way you change the environment completely, and so that changes the interior, the psychological.
Yeah, makes me think of there's a great Creative Time project by Superflex where they. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah. A little bit, but go ahead.
Were you familiar with it back there? Oh, can you speak to it?
I don't know if it's good less in terms of changing environments.
Oh, yeah.
To stimulate a certain understanding. I don't know.
I was just talking about this very particular. They do such cool work, but
where they rearrange. I don't know if this is. I can't remember the name, but they rearrange the park so that different aspects of the park has cultural elements from different countries. And then when you're in that section, it becomes part of that. And you walk a couple steps over, and it's like you're in another country entirely, because they take the hydrants of that country, or they take the lampposts or the street signs.
Oh, weird. Okay.
So it creates a genuine belonging in space.
Right, and genuine space that you know is also fake, so it's like being in Disneyland. Yeah, Epcot. But the project I was talking about was like this weird one in this diner in the Lower East Side of Manhattan where they renovated the bathroom so that it's this greasy spoon diner.
Yes.
And they renovated the bathroom upstairs so that it's this complete, perfect replica of the J.P. Morgan and Chase executive's bathroom. So like to the fixtures and the kind of toilet paper and the IKEA prints on the walls and like every aspect, literally. They did this renovation, and it's called the Power Toilet. And basically, like, you can go, it's a public restroom. The diner's like, we don't know what the hell is going on. It's fine. You want to do a $30,000 renovation in our bathroom? Sure. And so basically, that's a public toilet, and you can go use that. And the experience of using it, that's what's so freaky about these libraries is that you're encouraged to think about the space as a real space, but you actually also know that you're performing some kind of lived metaphor or something.
It's quite literally a virtual space without being digital.
Yeah.
But
Like it's a virtual reality.
Yeah.
What if there were multiple libraries, and there were multiple versions of the Oval Office? It functions, I think, differently than creative time.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That you walk in and you know it's a gallery, and you know it's a text, you know it's...
It's a monument.
You're not using it in the same way that it's normally used. As opposed to the bathroom, you can use it.
Right. That's different.
I think still in that the intention is that we know it's a replica, but the intention is that it is as real as it's. You're not going to go to the Oval Office. This is really going to get.
Possibly could be.
Yeah, and the other truth about that, I guess, too, is that every president, refabs the Oval Office and all the cabinet rooms every time they step in office. So even those spaces are pretty empty until the president comes in and says, I want this kind of carpet, I want this painting on here, and I want these statues here.
But there's something totally authoritative.
The materials are the same, it's just a question of authorship.
Yeah, it seems like, maybe.
Or owning property.
You speak a little bit more about when the president, you said earlier that they come and when they go to that city, that's where they live at the library. Is that true?
A part of the specs for building the library is it has to have an office for the president and a living quarters. So it becomes like a site where that person can return to. Like a good example of this is that Bush lives in his presidential library. Like that's a part of his house and home, and he spends. For I guess it's 42, whatever the first Bush. Right, so that's part of his house and home, and his public office and everything. And so some people do some presidents have use it as a actual site. It's kind of like picking up the White House and just moving it to a different site. And you have security, you have all the accoutrements. Everybody calls you Mr. President, all the same stuff, except it's in this giant other building, library thing. So it is kind of like a weird giant condo or something. The president. It's very creepy, yeah. Totally
I
strange.
didn't realize that Bush lived in Kansas.
Yeah.
That is really
Yes,
crazy.
it's really crazy, yeah. Yeah, and maybe it's not 5 days a week, maybe it's 3 or 4 days a week.
Right.
But just the recent reading I did, it's he spent a significant amount of time there. Because it's probably pretty nice.
Yeah. And also just constantly being surrounded by your accomplishments and your, touting your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, back to this kind of question of virtual space. It's really kind of continually creating the kind of environment that allows you to feel successful and actually in the future be successful in your endeavors or whatever your political agenda might be.
So do we think, if we were to place something like this in a place like Englewood, do you think that, the area would feel that? Do you think that those effects, would kind of...
Would be, real?
Yeah, do you think that it could actually help revitalize an area like that?
That's kind of why I guess I bring up these kind of other imaginative ways to deal with archives, because I think in the current way that we imagine these presidential libraries functioning and working, they tout it says of the president, and they have information there about the president's life, and about the presidency, right? And that kind of structure, no, it wouldn't do anything. Englewood doesn't need another library.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It needs a really deep political transformative engagement, right? That's so deep that it can't happen anyplace else, right? it's so specific and so deep, it can't happen anywhere else. Every major city in the country has similar difficulties and problems with neighborhoods in them. If a library was a solution, then they would all be doing it. Clearly, it's not. You'd have to really deal with the problems in Inglewood. You have to look at race and poverty very, very closely in a way that would really shatter people's thinking. You'd have to redistribute money differently. You couldn't build a building at all. You'd have to actually do intense community engagement, policy changes, redistricting, transportation would have to change. You have to do all those things, which they probably spend just as much. If you could fuse all the money that goes into a library that will go in this library, you could probably transform Inglewood. You just couldn't, but you couldn't do that by building a library. Yeah.
The city's also in such a nature of transportation. I mean, I've only been here for 3 years, so I can only say so much. But it seems there's this whole new plan for this new transportation system and everything, expansion of it, and I don't know, it seems like we're really trying to grow so much this way. So just,
I wonder if we could take a step back from the conversation and maybe think about, okay, so Obama's library, wherever it's going to be, or these kinds of libraries or archives or memorial/institutions. The Hull House is an alternative model to representing someone's life, and the reason why it's different and interesting to you is because it's self-reflexive, it's open for criticism, it's not trying to create a narrative, it's just offering. If you want to check it out, if you want to look at all the dirty laundry, it's there.
Okay.
So perhaps maybe we can talk about what is a model that we would want to see in the Obama Library, or we would want to see in this kind of project. What is something that works better than what we have been dealing with? Than these huge performative, crazy fun houses.
I can answer.
Or just to toss it around.
Yeah. So let's speak about it.
If we care.
Who wants to bet there's going to be a model of Osama bin Laden's compound? There's a sandbox and you could roll around in a cave.
I'm sorry. Talking out loud. Whoa! Over here. Just to bring it to this level of a weird performative zone.
Well, that's not crazy. I mean, the horse cut off at the knees.
That's good and crazy.
Yeah, if you had brought that up to somebody, I don't think anybody would say yes to that, but there it is. So maybe the giant sandbox with the Osama bin Laden compound. That's not a stretch.
That would be the ultimate performance piece.
It could be a laser tag game.
That was composted with himself.
His ashes sprinkled throughout.
So Inglewood, I've been in Chicago for 4 days. Is that the inner city?
No, it's southwest.
Been here for 5 days?
It's probably the highest crime rate per capita in the U.S.
That's true.
I don't know the current highest murder rate per capita in the U.S. Pretty tough.
And I guess another way to kind of nuance this question about, what would we want a presidential library to do? Another way to look at that too is there's an enormous amount of resources that are going to be directed towards Chicago. And the question really is where do you want to direct those resources? And does it go to places like Inglewood, and that's what you want to do? Or does it go to Veteran Affairs, and that's what we want to do, because we have so many vets from the last 3 wars we've been fighting for the last 10 years, right? So there's that kind of thing. Or do we want it to go toward another kind of public engagement that really is tied into the way that Obama kind of ran his presidential library, with this kind of diffused political kind of engagement that was about everybody? Do we want something like that happening? So that's another way to think about it. Where do these resources actually end up going?
This libraries do this pretend post-race thing and have a lot of insights on it. Talk about terrorism. I don't know. I feel like it's going to try really hard and then really bad.
Anybody else feel that way?
So I think that's sort of the attitude of up to well-to-do Americans in general.
I kind of feel that way too, actually.
I kind of wish they put it in Hawaii.
That would be great.
But I guess the bigger question is like, how are we supposed to deal with the fact that these narratives need to be created? Like, do they need to be created, or do we offer like a big open source thing where information can be accessed in a non-mediated way?
Well, like the archives in universities, like all of like JSTOR and stuff, like, they just make money off of publications from like decades ago, and no one else can access that.
Right, right. So JSTOR being locked up, lock and key.
There's art versions of that. Like every like visual cultural thing you can find a PDF of, and then zoom in and dig it on.
And who was that young man who committed suicide because he was so upset about?
Was he the one that was trying to like hack it and make it public?
Yes.
Yeah.
Aaron
Swartz.
So I mean, right, like this is actually a really crucial, important issue. Like information is being chained up.
It's funny because that question of like where information is held, the National Archives, the National Archives who administers all the provincial libraries. Their mission is to provide access to. I mean, their kind of mission begins in a democracy. A democracy depends on people's access to information. That's like their statement, and that's they run the. I think what Sepa was saying, they do the Congressional Library. We have access to that stuff. You can find it really easily. It's online. You can go to the building and sign up and get info. But then the presidential libraries, of course, are a different kind of level, different kind of access point, where it doesn't kind of align with that mission either, right? The National Archives is always fighting these library projects because they're privately funded, and the president has total control over them because there's are restrictions on access that are built into the laws that were passed, but also just in the way that they work and function. Because they also are these political tools, and so preventing Americans from having access to certain information allows more manipulation of narrative and story and controlling us. The question of access is really key, and how do you provide access to many, many terabytes of information?
And I wonder, like, what kind of information, too?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, like
what is that?
What is it?
In those terabytes?
Emails? I don't know.
Right, like we can unearth like information about people's affairs and what is it that they?
Or like I guess a good example of what's in them is because it's been 12 years since Bill Clinton has left office. There's been like all the requests for information or all the requests for Information Act stuff is actually coming due right now in these waves, right? So most recently, like the list of entries for the White House, so like this list that keeps the visits, keeps in and out of all the where people are in the building and who is in and out of the building, right? And so you can use this kind of cross-reference. Oh, the president was here in this room, and like in the drawing room here. And at 2:00, and so from the State Department came over at 2, or 10 minutes to 2. So maybe that he had a meeting with those two people. And so there's lots of like journalists who do that kind of matching up or whatever. And that's how they when they came out, it was a big deal because you could figure out where Hillary Clinton was in the White House, where Monica Lewinsky was in the White House, and where Bill Clinton was, and you can triangulate their movements throughout the building. So it's that kind of information, weird stuff like that.
But isn't there some sort of clause that there can be guests who don't have to be on those rolls, like secret guests? There
are those lists, but those people, there is a role for those folks as well, and that's kept in the archives as well. So they're classified differently. So there's unrestricted and restricted materials, and the president decides what is restricted and what is unrestricted. It's been 12 years. Most information is open to the public after 5 years. Those roles during that period were restricted for 12 years for the very fact of the scandal between Monica Lewinsky and whatnot. So there is like some kind of deep control over who can see what and when and how, and what is restricted. But even with the unrestricted material, there is a date where that stuff will be available for people to say, I want access to it. Whether or not you get access to it is a different thing. But to be able to say, I want access, I know this exists, is kind of the only move that the public can make, that journalists make.
I wonder if we can go back, like, just quickly to this idea of like making up a narrative is just as effective as a real narrative, and maybe toss that around a little bit. I don't know if anyone has a thought about that. So I was just thinking about like running.
seems like part of what's exciting about the Walid Raad stuff is that he, like whatever the separation is between like facts and truth is kind of where he lodges like the specifics of everything that he's doing are typically constructed and they're fake, but they're going towards some sort of like affective truth that reveals something about war and about like
Right, that is actually like a good message to get out there, or right. So like,
but it's like historical fiction, so it's like that there's a way that it tells these stories that like didn't necessarily happen, but that they happened in a different sense.
yes,
Which is also complicated when there's photographic things because like the thing that's being photographed is in fact a real life thing that image was taken of. It's just that the way that it's being framed and contextualized is one that engages fictively, let's say.
fictive.
But what's is that then there's like, if you, the way that archive project is able to kind of fool people, let's say, or people believe that it is true, is because of this level of the type of specificity that it uses.
Right, like
it's
the
not just
notes.
like, yeah, because there's something about just like a belief that in that overwhelm of information and that level of specificity that they must be true, right? In the same way that like having terabytes of information is in fact like a way of obfuscating whatever sort of truth is in there, by just being like, here, spend the rest of your life looking through this.
Yeah, like look at right, deal with this and.
You'll never get through it.
But the point you're making is that the things that are presented as true, even though they may not be, there are certain things that happened that were never sort of recorded, and so this is almost like a placeholder for like the kind of affect that they produce.
Well, it's the same thing as when a politician will give a speech like, and I was just visiting with Steve, and Steve is a printer down in Lafayette, and like Steve doesn't exist, but the idea is that this person is like the placeholder for a sort of narrative that they want to.
Yes. Yeah.
So they seem similar.
I think it's a real like. I just see that as like it's both artistic and like political, being able to create a narrative to tell a story, and couch it in the accoutrements of factual information, even though it's like it might be truthful.
Right.
But it's not factual, like you were saying?
Like you said, historical fiction. It's so
Yeah.
that's such a like. I'm so glad you brought that up because that's such a weird term that actually could be, applied to these presidential libraries. There.
But also, it has to do with responsibilities. There's also this way. And I mean, in my own personal life, I think a lot about like how excited I am about this sort of elasticity of language and how you can sort of like reconfigure the feeling of the thing by shifting what it's describing so slightly, and like this is exciting and important and worth anybody who like does things in aesthetic fields understand. And then what about when the same tactics are used by mass media or by politicians, which is happening continually in terms of just like shifting the way that things are described ever so slightly to produce confusion or to discredit the truth. That is like frustrating and feels deceitful in a way that it means like a different. In my mind, this is like a different level of responsibility for somebody who's engaged in politics, or there should be some sort of civil service, than somebody who is an artist and who's like trying to post things out of.
Right, and there's always that spin, like you're saying, and there's like facts, and then there are true facts, and then this is always happening all the time. This kind of like spinning.
And I guess I really appreciate the unreal nature of it. That there is a really thin line between what's true, what's fictional, what's fact, and how much does the truth really matter? Like you're saying, like artists might not have the same responsibility as politicians or whatever in terms of how they present that kind of information. Yeah, while he's dealing with a really, really difficult issue of war and death, and so maybe he doesn't have the same responsibility, but the line certainly is like very, very thin between what actually happens and what stories we tell about it. And I like the idea of us tossing all that up in the air, that like really we can look at this and we can look at any kind of subject or any kind of issue and present it in many, many different ways. Makes the ground like feel really shaky, I guess, for me. Like, okay, then what do I really know, and how do I know anything at all? And I think we know stuff through the kind of emotional connection to things. That's what I think Walid's project does really well. Is it's very emotional and very visceral sometimes, and strange or whatever. But it also helps you kind of gauge whether it's true or not, or where it's going and stuff.
I really appreciated your incorporation have that desire to perpetuate those stories. And as viewers, I think it's kind of weird when we want to perpetuate and when we don't, and what kind of things inform that desire to.
What kind of things inform our desire
To perpetuate it. Or
to like continue believing, like can stretch the yeah.
Like when do we want to go to those presidential libraries
Yeah.
and be critical, or when do we want to go and have them be monuments?
Yeah. Yeah. But Coco Fusco, you're kind of saying it's like she's like, hold up, like forget about that, like.
Kind of like with James Lynn, not in that one, but in the like take your picture with a real Indian.
Yeah.
Like it's about like all the people who do want to take your picture with a real Indian.
Sure. Okay.
And
Yeah.
kind of playing into that thing of like we desire to perpetuate this narrative.
Right.
And why?
But do you think Coco and James Lynn are saying like, okay, wake up, like wake up to reality and like stop trying to do this? Or I don't know, yeah.
But at the same time, like I don't feel, as far as I know, I don't know that there's like a disclaimer on the piece that
No,
tells
there isn't.
someone like you participated in perpetuating this.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes kind of like a thing of just like alerting us viewers where we're at.
Yeah.
That's kind of peculiar, and I do wonder, like in creating a educational piece, if that's what the purpose of a presidential library would be, how much you could play with, like, I don't know, like pointing the finger at the viewer, I guess.
Play with the desires of the viewer.
Or like alert people to how they're engaging in a piece.
I think that's what's like, you're talking about self-reflexivity, like that's about like understanding what something is doing and what you want out of it, and certainly I'll use more of that. And I think that's weird, I mean, just as a segue, like there's some really strange artists that make things that are hyper-aware that sort of like people would want to buy them or like them. We were looking at yesterday's roundtable, there was some really good, like, what are those pictures from John's talk with, I don't know if you're here yet. I'm going on a tangent, but like people who are producing things, being aware that they will be perceived in a certain way. It's almost like they know better, but they're going to go down that road anyway.
I pulled from your comment a lot. It was like the reason why someone would go to the presidential library was like to reinforce that dominant narrative, which has a pattern, and so you go there and it like reinforces it, and it's like this Disneyland of that like imagination of what the future is. And then with the pieces that we presented, it's so much about an interruption of these patterns, an interruption of the narratives, and so when you think like, you were mentioning narratives a lot, and you were mentioning information a lot. Narratives are made out of information. They form patterns, and that's where the narrative comes. It's a repetition. You see trends and so on.
Right. And we didn't even talk about Fred Wilson really that much, but Fred Wilson, is not only, he's using information, like instead, going through an archive of a museum, curating a show that includes a pair of shackles along with the silver tea service, that was present in this historical collection. So really like freaking everyone out and bringing to light those narratives that have been underrepresented.
I guess even that are kind of separated too, because the shackles are, I guess, finding a single term that both these things fit under that juxtapose them. But even though we can't think of them as very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just so insensitive.
Pardon?
It's absurdly insensitive.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yes. But that's what's so cool about Fred Wilson.
It's like very,
Oh, this isn't in the library, right? I was thinking this was in the residential library.
Oh, no.
Shackles. But it's kind of what we're talking about, though. What if something like this was in a presidential library? We were talking about earlier as to what we want to see a presidential library be. But so many people go there already expecting a certain type of dominant narrative, and we're talking about this whole, like, they still take what they want to interpret. They'll still take what they want to see.
What about like now Bustamante's performance with like the burrito, and she asked every white male audience member if they would like to come and like repent for their like colonialism in this country by leather, you know, like
Wow.
S&M garb.
Mhm.
She's like the Chicano.
What's her name?
Now Bustamante.
No,
I'm gonna Jones give it some time for work.
Oh, great.
But just to go back to that point, I think that's, you know, I guess if people are having expectations when they walk into one of these libraries, is it good or acceptable to kind of change those expectations? And can you actually do it? Is it effective to do that? Because there'll be a moment where we're always kind of saying, well, no, that's not how I want it to be or should be or whatever. So the pushback against that. Like, could you do a similar move like this? I don't know what it would be, but could you do a similar move in a presidential library like, I don't know, like Reagan's, where you really have juxtaposed things and challenge people's ways of thinking about who this person was? I think in some ways, maybe the whole house can do that or has done that in certain projects. With like was Jane Addams a lesbian project? They do that. They meet every couple of weeks, whatever, to talk about that issue. Was she lesbian? What was the nature of the relationship? You know, can we actually look at somebody who's so historically important and just be consumed by, you know, who she was sleeping with or who she wasn't sleeping with but was hanging around with? You know.
Same with
Langston Hughes, yeah, really good example of that. Do we get down to that kind of level? And do we want to be confronted with that kind of stuff? I'm not sure.
How does the Nixon library deal with
Yeah, good question. So, because the president basically builds their own library, the first presidential
Red flag.
Red flag, yeah. Red flag. That's the problem. The Nixon's library wasn't built for a long time. There were like many supporters around him that liked him a lot and raised money, and a lot of infighting what the thing would be. But once Nixon was out long enough and could really take control of it, it really became a propaganda kind of unit of his reformation of his image. So for many years, it functioned just as that, and it didn't mention Watergate in any fashion or form. And then when it did, it kind of mentioned it as a moment where he had some rogue, very passionate rogue staffers who did this mean thing, and now he took the fall for it, right? That was like the narrative that he was always showing people. When of course the truth is that he used the FBI to systematically watch his political opponents, and they used the executive power to fight his political opponents in illegal ways, right? So he used it as a way to divert attention and kind of.
And report himself saying.
Yeah, exactly. So recently in 2008, when they redid the library, a new curator redid the library, fought against Nixon supporters, and now they have kind of a more substantial, display of Watergate that asks an open question of, well, what did the president know and when did he know it? So it's very different. But, I mean, that was like, I don't know when Nixon left office, it was a while ago. This is a huge time span between them. So I guess that the thing to take from the Nixon, I guess, is that over time, these libraries can become more transparent as we get some distance from the event.
Yeah, how do you make an entity that would not allow presidents to make a dollhouse in a sense?
Yeah.
You know, maybe I don't know, art historians or cultural critics.
Maybe we should have artists organizing presidential.
All right.
Totally, that's not really good.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Ross, and we're a little bit over, but I think we're coming to a natural close here, so really want to thank you, and thanks again to Trish and Expo for bringing us here.
Yeah.
So,
On Sunday.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, we gotta go out and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. So.
Also, I do want to say we have another panel happening at Design Lab about writing international. Terry Myers, Tara Plath.
Is that happening right now?
Yes,
Great, so let's go.
And then there's a cocktail reception meeting following. So I invite you all to come and just right on the board.
Okay.
My name's Ross. Yeah. Thanks, man. You had so many comments. That was great. And you've been in Chicago? You said you just only been in
I went there Monday.
Okay, well, welcome to Chicago.
Yeah. What do you do?
I work at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I work at the School of the Art Institute. I manage student exhibitions on campus and work in the exhibition department.